The advertisement for the tour guide job at the haunted castle seemed too good to pass up. I had been scouring job listings for months, looking for something simple, something that would keep me busy without overwhelming me. A job as a tour guide at an old historical site seemed like the perfect fit. The hours were flexible and the pay was decent, enough to cover rent and bills, with some left over for the occasional night out. There was one catch. The castle was known for being haunted. I had no interest in ghost stories or paranormal activity. In fact, I found most ghost tales to be a bit childish. But there was something undeniably intriguing about working in a place with such a rich, dark history. The castle had stood for hundreds of years, with stories of ghostly apparitions, disappearing guests, and strange phenomena. Most of the tourists came for the thrill of experiencing the supernatural, but for me, it was just another job. The interview went smoothly. The manager, a woman named Helen, explained that the castle had been converted into a tourist attraction many years ago, capitalizing on its eerie reputation. The job would mostly consist of leading tours, giving visitors a brief rundown of the castle's history, and maybe guiding them through a few haunted spots. There were always plenty of guests, particularly around Halloween, but the castle wasn't exactly busy all year round. The hours were mainly evenings after the visitors had gone home, which left me plenty of time to focus on other things during the day. Helen seemed a bit too polished, like someone who had worked there for far too long. Her voice was soothing, but her eyes, always darting around the room, gave off a sense of nervous energy. She seemed to almost anticipate something, and that made me uncomfortable. Still, it didn't bother me too much. It wasn't as if I was signing up for a horror movie. It was just a castle, and I needed the job. The first evening I worked there was uneventful. The castle was old, of course. Stone walls, long corridors, and heavy doors that creaked as they swung open. But it was beautiful, and its mystique was certainly intriguing. I spent the first hour learning the tour script, trying to memorize the names of the rooms and the various legends associated with each one. The castle had a long history, with royal families, battles, and strange disappearances woven into its story. But the most interesting part was the legend of the hauntings. The staff didn't speak much about the ghosts. They were, after all, just part of the experience, right? Helen had mentioned that the staff had all grown used to the odd occurrences, the cold spots, the flickering lights, the disembodied whispers, but they didn't make a big deal out of it. Tourists loved it. As long as the guests got what they came for, the rest of it was secondary. When the first group of guests arrived, I could feel the electricity in the air. They were eager, excited, as though they had been waiting for months for their chance to walk through the haunted halls of a real castle. Most of them were younger, in their 20s or 30s, looking for a thrill, but there was one couple in their late 50s, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, who seemed oddly out of place. They moved with an odd grace, never speaking but always following the group with strange precision. The older man had a vacant expression, while the woman had a cold smile that made my skin prickle. I led the group through the grand entrance hall, down corridors lined with ancient tapestries, and into the main dining room, where many of the ghost stories were centered. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the walls, and the guests clung to every word I said, their eyes wide as I spoke of disembodied voices, poltergeist activity, and the occasional shadow figure seen out of the corner of someone's eye. But then, as I moved toward the next room, I noticed something strange. The couple, the ones who had been acting so odd, had stopped, frozen in place, staring at the fireplace in the dining room. They didn't move, didn't react when I spoke to them. I thought it was a bit odd, but I continued with the tour, walking the guests into the next chamber, a large library that was rumored to be one of the most haunted rooms in the castle. As we passed through the library doors, I heard it, a soft whisper just behind me. It wasn't one of the guests. It wasn't even a sound from the room. It was as if something, or someone, was breathing in my ear. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was no one there. The couple had disappeared. I was unnerved, but I chalked it up to the eerie atmosphere of the castle. After all, the place had a way of making you feel like you were being watched, even when no one was around. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. I had just led a group of guests through the castle, but I had no idea where the couple had gone. They had vanished without a trace. By the end of the night, the rest of the tour had gone smoothly, and the guests were more than satisfied with the eerie tales I had spun. But something had lingered in the back of my mind. The couple, their strange behavior, and that whisper I'd heard. Something told me that the ghost stories weren't just stories. Something was real in this castle. The first night I worked as a tour guide in the haunted castle should have been just another typical shift, but something about it felt different. The walls of the castle seemed to hold their breath, and the air itself felt thick with an invisible weight. It was as though the place had its own heartbeat, and I was only just starting to hear it. As the last tour of the night wrapped up, I was instructed to lock up and make sure the building was secured for the evening. My shift was technically over, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The guests had been thrilled, of course, just as I'd expected. They had left the castle, chatting excitedly about the ghosts they'd encountered and the chilling tales I'd shared, but I couldn't shake the eerie presence that lingered in the dark halls long after they'd gone. The air in the dining room, where I had last seen the couple, felt different now. Colder. The fire that had been crackling just a few hours ago was nothing but smoldering embers. I had to fight the urge to look over my shoulder, to check if something was watching me from the shadows. It wasn't a logical fear, but a primal one. A fear that made me question whether or not the stories about the castle were simply ghost tales or something real, something I couldn't explain. I walked down the corridors, heading toward the main entrance to make sure the front door was locked. I was almost halfway there when I heard it, the faintest whisper. It stopped me in my tracks. I turned, glancing down the hallway. Nothing. The castle was silent. Too silent. There wasn't a soul left in the building except for me. I took a step forward, telling myself I was being silly, but the whisper came again. Soft, faint, almost as though it was just beyond my hearing. It didn't seem like a voice, more like a shiver in the air, something I couldn't quite grasp, yet it sent a chill down my spine. I was starting to question my own sanity. Maybe I was imagining things, or maybe it was just the atmosphere of the place getting to me. But as I took another step, I heard it again, this time clearer, like someone was standing just behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was still empty. I quickly moved toward the front entrance, trying to shake off the feeling of being followed. But the whispers continued to tickle the edge of my hearing, like an elusive presence that refused to let me go. The shadows in the corners of the rooms seemed to shift as I passed by, their movements subtle, like they were aware of me, watching my every move. The front door was locked, just as I had expected. I checked the other entrances, ensuring all was secure. But as I passed through the grand entryway, I caught sight of something in the corner of my eye. It was a reflection in one of the mirrors, one I didn't remember seeing before. I stopped dead in my tracks. The reflection was of a woman. She was standing there, just off to the side of the room, her back to me. She wore an old-fashioned gown, something out of the Victorian era. Her hair was pinned up in an elegant style, and she held herself with a grace that seemed out of place in a room filled with dust and decay. I blinked, and she was gone, vanished like a wisp of smoke. I ran my hands through my hair, shaking off the moment. Maybe I was just exhausted, my mind playing tricks on me. But the feeling of her presence lingered, hanging in the air like a perfume that wouldn't dissipate. Who was she? I couldn't understand it, but I knew. I wasn't alone in this castle. There was something, or someone, here with me. I was sure of it. The next hour passed in a blur as I finished locking up the castle. I quickly went through the standard procedures, securing the rooms and checking the windows to ensure no one could sneak back inside. The sounds, the whispers, the cold spots, and the fleeting shadows had all dissipated, leaving me in an uneasy quiet. The moonlight streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows that stretched across the floors. The castle felt abandoned, empty. But deep down, I knew better. The place had never truly been empty. I locked the back door and headed up the spiraling staircase toward the staff quarters, where I would finally get some rest. But just before I reached the landing, I saw something in the corner of my eye. Movement. At first, I thought it was another trick of the light, but when I turned my head to look, I saw her again. The woman. She was standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at me. This time, she wasn't fading away. She was real, solid. Her features were sharp, her face pale, with deep eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. She didn't speak, didn't move, but I could feel her gaze burning into my skin. I froze. "What do you want?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I meant to ask her, or if the question was simply a reflection of the fear bubbling in my throat. She tilted her head, just slightly, and I could see a faint smile on her lips. But it wasn't a kind smile. It was something more haunting. And then, in the blink of an eye, she was gone. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, but she had vanished. The hallway in front of me was empty, and the eerie silence returned. Only now it was filled with a deep, oppressive tension that made it hard to breathe. My heart was racing, my hands trembling. I couldn't believe what I had just seen, but I wasn't imagining it. She was real, and I wasn't the only one in this castle. The next few days at the castle felt like a blur. The line between the real world and the supernatural world blurring more and more with each passing hour. After my encounter with the ghostly woman, I tried to push the experience out of my mind, but it lingered. The castle seemed to be watching me, waiting for me to acknowledge its secrets. And then, things started to get stranger. I had been assigned to guide more tours, and I noticed a family that seemed to show up more often than any other guests. They were always polite, always cheerful, too perfect, really. They arrived at the castle on time, looked through the exhibits with polite smiles, and asked just the right questions, never too intrusive, just enough to give the impression of interest. There was a father, a mother, and 2 children, a boy and a girl. They were the picture of a happy family, the kind you might expect to see on a postcard from a scenic tourist destination. But something about them unsettled me. I'd first noticed them on my second day when I was given a tour of the grand ballroom, the heart of the castle's historical charm. The ballroom had witnessed some of the most dramatic moments of the castle's long history, from royal balls to hidden, forbidden meetings in its darker corners. Guests were always fascinated by the ballroom, and I had grown accustomed to their reactions. The awe, the hushed whispers, the excitement. But this family was different. They moved as though they were perfectly in sync, never getting in each other's way, almost as if they had rehearsed their movements in advance. I couldn't help but watch them closely. The mother had the same cool, composed expression the entire time, and the children, who appeared to be around 12 and 10, seemed to move with a fluid grace that was almost unnatural for their age. The father was the strangest of all. He was tall, with sharp features, and he didn't speak a word throughout the entire tour. It wasn't that he was quiet. It was more like he had forgotten how to speak, his eyes staring out blankly ahead as if in another world. I finished the tour and returned to the main office, but the family remained in the ballroom long after the other guests had left. I walked past the ballroom on my way to the staff lounge, and through the open door, I saw them still standing there, frozen in place. The kids were facing the walls, their backs to me, the mother and father standing eerily still as if they were waiting for something. I didn't know what it was, but something about their stillness was unnerving. I moved away quickly, trying to focus on the work ahead, but the image of that family lingered in my mind. They didn't seem like normal guests. They didn't seem like normal people at all. The next evening, I saw them again. This time, I was leading a smaller tour through the castle's gardens, a serene, beautiful area with fountains and winding paths, hidden away from the busy tourist spots. The family was there, of course. They didn't need to sign up for the tour. They seemed to just appear. The kids ran ahead, laughing, their laughter too bright, too loud, echoing unnaturally through the gardens. Their voices blended with the sound of the breeze, and I turned just in time to see the boy stop and turn to look at me. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, everything went still. The laughter ceased. The wind stopped. I could see the boy's eyes were glowing, faintly, like an ember burning beneath the surface. The expression on his face wasn't one of innocence. It was something darker, something unnatural. "Do you see it too?" he asked, his voice not quite human, as though the words were being pulled from somewhere else. Before I could respond, the boy and his sister ran off again, their laughter resuming like nothing had happened. I stumbled back, my heart racing in my chest. What was happening? After the tour, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to investigate. These guests, they were different, too perfect, too composed. I needed to know more about them. I started asking around, casually, about the family, but no one seemed to remember them ever arriving. The staff didn't recognize their faces. The front desk had no record of their stay. Yet, somehow, they kept appearing, over and over, always exactly where I was. That night, after my shift ended, I decided to venture deeper into the castle, to places I hadn't been before. Maybe I could find out more about these mysterious guests, these ghosts. As I walked through the halls, I felt an almost magnetic pull leading me to the west wing of the castle, an area that was closed off to the public. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in protest, and found myself standing in a dark, dusty corridor. At the end, there was a small room, locked, but I could see through the cracks in the door. Inside, I found old portraits hanging on the walls. They were dusty, faded, but as I took a closer look, my blood ran cold. The family. They were in the portraits, the same family I had been seeing. The man, the woman, the children. But these weren't just paintings. They were moving. The figures in the portraits blinked, shifted, and turned their eyes toward me. My heart pounded. I couldn't tear my eyes away, but I knew in that moment I wasn't just dealing with guests. I was dealing with something ancient, something that had been here long before the tourists arrived. The family, I realized, was no ordinary group of guests. They were trapped here, like the rest of the ghosts. But why were they so focused on me? I had to find answers. The realization hit me like a cold wave. The family I had been seeing in the castle, the ones who had seemed so perfect, so unnervingly composed, were more than just regular guests. They were trapped here, just like the other spirits I'd encountered. But why? Why did they keep coming back to the castle, and why did they seem so fixated on me? I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I had stumbled into something far bigger than a simple haunted house. The castle had a history, a dark history, and it was alive in ways that went beyond the walls. Determined to understand more, I began to delve into the castle's past, the hidden records that the staff didn't openly discuss. I went through dusty old ledgers, history books, and personal accounts that had been tucked away in the castle's library, looking for something, anything that might explain the strange happenings. What I found was chilling. The castle had been built centuries ago by a wealthy family, the Morningsides, who had lived there for generations. On the surface, their story was typical: landowners, aristocrats, the keepers of secrets. But beneath that, there was something far darker. The Morningsides were known for their obsession with the occult, their fascination with immortality and eternal life. They believed that by binding their spirits to the land they owned, through rituals and blood sacrifices, they could escape death. I began to read about their rituals, the things they had done to ensure their souls would never leave. The first mention of the family's strange practices appeared in the 16th century. They had made a pact with forces beyond the realm of the living, involving arcane rites that promised them eternity. But something went horribly wrong. The ritual they performed required a sacrifice, a life offered to the ancient forces they had bargained with. It wasn't enough to simply pledge allegiance to the darkness. The Morningsides needed to spill blood. The chosen sacrifice was meant to anchor their souls to the castle, ensuring they would never age or die. But in their greed and desperation, they tried to make a double sacrifice, a man and his family. They intended to bind their spirits and keep them in the castle for eternity. Instead, they created something far worse. The ritual went horribly wrong, and instead of locking the spirits away, they unleashed them. A terrible curse settled over the castle. The Morningsides were not blessed with eternal life. They were cursed to remain trapped within the castle's walls, unable to leave, unable to move on. The walls of the castle became a prison, trapping not just the family's spirits, but the spirits of everyone who had ever died there. A labyrinth of souls. The records described the desperation of the Morningsides as they realized their mistake. The family tried everything they could to escape, but the curse was already too strong. Their sacrifices had bound them to the land, and now they were locked in place, doomed to repeat their final days over and over, their spirits forever wandering the halls of the castle, unable to find rest. I took a deep breath, staring at the old pages in front of me. The family I had been seeing, they weren't just ghosts. They were the Morningsides. The ritual had cursed them to relive the same endless nightmare, forever drawn back to the place where it all went wrong. They were trapped in a timeless loop, condemned to return to the castle again and again, in the same forms, the same bodies, as if they had never left. The more I read, the more I realized that the castle itself was a prison for all of them, feeding on their souls. The energy of the castle was charged, not with the usual hauntings, but with the force of the curse. The family's ghostly reappearance was not a random event. It was part of a greater pattern. The castle called them back over and over because it needed them. The ritual had bonded them to this place, and now it wanted to keep them here. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just learning about the past. I was part of something much bigger. I had become a player in a game I didn't fully understand. And worse, I realized that if the Morningsides weren't the only ones who were cursed, then I might be next. I spent the next few hours pacing the library, trying to piece everything together. What could I do to break the cycle? I couldn't just sit back and watch this endless nightmare continue. I had to stop it before the castle decided to claim me too. I remembered the woman from the mirror, the one who had appeared in the hallway and smiled at me. She had been part of the original Morningside family, or at least she had once been. Her spirit had lingered, trapped just like the rest of them. But if I could break the ritual, break the bonds that held them here, would she be able to move on? Would the others? I didn't know, but I had to try. I gathered my courage and decided to speak with Helen, the castle manager. Something told me that she knew more about what was happening than she was letting on. If I was going to break the curse, I would need her help. Or at least, I needed to find out what part she played in all of this. The following evening, after spending hours in the library poring over old books and papers, I knew I had to speak with Helen. She was the one constant in the castle, the only person who had been there longer than any of the staff. If anyone knew how to break the curse, it had to be her. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was more than just the castle manager. She had to know something that could help me set things right. I waited until after the evening tour, just as the last guests were heading out. The castle was quiet again, the kind of quiet that felt too still, too dead. I found Helen in the back office, scribbling notes in a ledger, her face lit by the soft glow of a single desk lamp. Her expression softened when she saw me, but I could tell something was off. She was always calm, always composed, but tonight there was an unmistakable tension in the air around her. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice shaking with urgency. "I need to know what's going on here, what's really happening in this castle." Helen looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she was weighing the words carefully before speaking. "What do you mean?" she asked, but there was something in her tone that betrayed her calm demeanor. "I know about the family," I said, deciding not to dance around the issue. "I know what they are. I know what the castle is." Her face paled for a moment, and her hand paused mid-air. She didn't look surprised. She looked worried. "How much do you know?" she asked quietly. "Enough," I replied. "I know about the Morningsides, the curse. I know that the castle is holding them and that it's feeding off their spirits. I know that they're not just ghosts. They're stuck here, reliving the same nightmare. And I think I'm next." Helen let out a long, slow sigh, leaning back in her chair as if she had been holding the weight of the world on her shoulders. She didn't speak right away, as though she was deciding whether or not to tell me the truth. But then she met my gaze, and in her eyes, I saw a mixture of regret and resignation. "You're right," she said finally, her voice low and hesitant. "The Morningsides are the key to this curse. They made a deal long ago, trying to escape death, trying to cheat fate, and they paid a terrible price." I nodded, my heart pounding as I sat down across from her, hanging on every word. But the ritual, they tried to bind their souls to the castle, to live forever. But it went wrong, didn't it? They couldn't escape. They're trapped here. Helen's eyes softened. Yes, but it wasn't just a ritual. It was a pact, a dark agreement with something ancient, something powerful. The castle was built on sacred land, and the Morningsides thought they could control the forces of death and the afterlife. But they weren't prepared for what they unleashed. They tried to bind themselves to the land, and in doing so, they made a pact with the spirits of the dead, binding the entire castle to the realm of the lost. I felt a chill creep down my spine. And now, they're trapped in a cycle, forced to relive the same day, every day. But why is it happening now? Why is the family coming back? Why me? Helen hesitated, her fingers drumming nervously on the desk. The curse has patterns. Every few decades, the spirits of the Morningsides are called back, drawn to the castle. But the real reason it's happening now, why you're involved, is because you've awakened the castle's power. The spirits can feel you, feel your presence, and they're using you, trying to pull you in. They want to drag you into the same endless loop of suffering they're trapped in. I felt a knot form in my stomach. What can I do to stop it? Helen stood up slowly, walking to the window as she stared out at the castle grounds. The only way to break the curse is to undo the ritual, but the ritual is forbidden. There's a cost. To set the Morningsides free, to free all the trapped souls in the castle, you have to make a sacrifice. I leaned forward, my heart racing. A sacrifice? What kind of sacrifice? Helen's voice dropped to a whisper. A life. The one who breaks the curse has to offer themselves, give their soul to the spirits. They'll be the new anchor for the curse, the new guardian of the castle's souls. You can't escape the pact. It's been binding for centuries. But in exchange, the other spirits can move on. The Morningsides can find peace. I stared at her in disbelief. You're telling me the only way to save everyone is to sacrifice myself? Helen nodded solemnly. It's the only way, and the castle won't let you leave until you make that choice. I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me. Everything I had done, everything I had learned was leading me to this point. The curse had a price, and it wasn't just the ghosts that were trapped here. I was trapped too. I had a decision to make. But in that moment, I knew I couldn't just walk away from the souls that were crying out for release. I had to set them free, even if it meant giving up my own future. The weight of the decision pressed down on me, heavier than any responsibility I had ever faced in my life. I stood in the small office, staring at Helen, the truth about the curse unraveling before me. The castle, its haunting, its ghosts, its ancient power, was all tied to an old pact, a dark ritual that had bound the Morningsides and countless others to this place. But breaking the curse would come at a terrible cost, a sacrifice of my own soul to set them free. Helen's words echoed in my mind, the thought of sacrificing myself, of being trapped forever, not just in the castle but as part of its curse gnawing at me. How could I just accept such a fate? Was it truly the only way? But the ghosts, the spirits of the Morningsides and the others, I could feel their presence, their pain, their longing for release. Could I really live with myself if I turned my back on them now? I turned from Helen, pacing the room, my mind racing, trying to find some other solution. There had to be another way. There had to be. The thought of becoming a part of the castle, a permanent fixture in its cycle of death, made my stomach twist. But I had no choice, did I? The curse wouldn't let me leave until I made the sacrifice. I thought about all the tours I had given, the guests who had come and gone, unknowingly stepping into a haunted world, the family that had been reliving their final days, forever trapped in a world between life and death. I thought about the ghostly whispers, the cold spots, the flickering lights. It was more than just superstition. The castle needed something from me. It had been feeding off the energy of its trapped souls, waiting for the right moment to claim me too. But I couldn't. No, I wouldn't let it take me. I had to make a choice. The lives of the trapped souls, their freedom, were worth more than my own. I looked at Helen, her face pale, yet somehow resigned. She had known what I was going to have to do all along. "If I do this," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper, "how do I even begin?" Helen's gaze softened. "The ritual must be performed in the grand hall, the center of the castle. That's where the pact was made. That's where the power resides." She reached into a drawer and pulled out an old book, its pages yellowed with age. "This contains the instructions on how to perform the sacrifice. There's a ceremony, a series of words to speak, an offering to give. If you complete it, the curse will be broken and the spirits will be set free." I took the book, my hands trembling as I flipped through its pages. The words were written in an ancient, forgotten language, but as I read, I began to understand the gravity of what I was about to do. A life for a life. It wasn't just a ritual. It was binding, an act of surrender. Once I performed the ceremony, there would be no turning back. I would be bound to the castle, to its walls, to the eternal curse. My soul would become part of the very energy that had kept the spirits trapped. I would be their guardian, their protector, until the end of time. The weight of it all settled on me. There was no escape, but there was also freedom. The freedom I could give to the spirits of the castle, the ones who had been wandering, lost, for centuries. I turned to Helen one last time. What happens to me after the ritual? Will I still be me? Or will I just fade away? Helen's expression grew somber, and she slowly nodded. "You won't fade away, but you won't be the same either. You'll exist here, in this place, alongside the others. It's a price, but it's the only way to give them peace. You'll become part of the castle itself, a part of its eternal cycle. The choice is yours." The air in the room felt thick with anticipation, like the castle itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make my decision. I glanced at the book, its weight in my hands heavier than ever, and then I looked out the window at the castle that loomed in the distance, its dark silhouette against the night sky. I could leave. I could walk away and never come back. The real world was out there, full of possibilities, full of life. But the castle had already chosen me. I was already part of its story, part of its dark history. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I turned to Helen and nodded. "I'll do it. I'll break the curse." Helen's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she didn't say anything. She simply reached into her drawer and pulled out a small pendant, a symbol of the castle's ancient power. "This will protect you during the ritual," she said softly. "It will help guide you, but remember, once it begins, there's no turning back." I took the pendant and looked at it, feeling the weight of my decision settle in. I had no choice. The spirits needed to be freed. The curse needed to end. I left the office, the pendant clutched tightly in my hand, and headed toward the grand hall where my fate awaited me.